To begin with, if you want to know my beginning, is I was born in 1956. I was born in Royal Oak, Michigan. That's the name of the town where the hospital was. But I've always kind of liked the name of that I was in Royal Oak. My mom and dad had 6 children. I'm the youngest. And my brother Dave is the oldest, 15 years older than me. And my brother Jim is 14 years older than me. And so as I grew up, I never really associated a lot with them, because I know Dave moved out east when I think I was 4 years old. He moved to New Hampshire, and I don't really remember him living at our home. And then Jim did spend some time working in Detroit while I was, 6, 7, 8 years old. And he did take me to some of his jobs sometime when he was working, so I do have those memories. Our family was amazing as far as a loving Christian family, and I just have very fond memories of my whole childhood growing up, and that's never changed. My siblings and parents were always wonderful, and I kind of assumed that most families were like that in this world, because I was young then and I didn't know. But as I'm older now, I know I was really blessed, because many families, very few can, encounter a family like that. But as I grew, we might have traveled a little bit going up to northern Michigan, or where my parents were from. And we came to New Hampshire because my elder brothers and sister Karen was out here, Karen Aho. And then we did go to Washington, in Oregon, where my other 2 sisters were. So we did some traveling, but my point that I'm trying to bring out right now is, as I grew up in school, I remember in February a lot of the, I'd say, wealthier children in the school would talk about their trip going to Florida for a week or 2 during, our winter season in February. But in my mind, it was way above anything our family would experience. We were down low, and it wasn't anything that I was offended by. It was just a way of life. But I never thought that someday, I would be traveling to Florida and then going out farther into the picture, traveling around the world. And especially, as reading the Bible as a child and teenager, and you're reading all about Israel and Jerusalem, and I never dreamt someday I would go there. It was just a far, far past area that I never thought you could even go there. So that was a big change in my life when I realized and was it capable of, going, even with, work here in New Hampshire. So that was one of the big areas that I thought was interesting. In school, I never really liked school, although obviously as kindergarten, first grade, it's all a new era in your life. So I did enjoy going. I did okay. As I grew into the older grades, and we had choices of what classes we would take, I tended to always choose the easy ones. And I know even all the way up into high school, I had like a B minus, B average or something, but I just didn't like school in the high school days. And they had an option for the boys to be in ROTC, the Air Force, ROTC. So for 3 years, I was able to attend that class every day, ROTC. And we had 2 former Air Force lieutenants that were our teachers. And they would teach us, science and different areas of schooling that you need. But they also would spend time teaching us about the military. And every Wednesday of each week, we had to wear an actual Air Force uniform to school, and we would do marching out in the ball fields, and it was just an interesting time in my high school days. And then when we were graduating in 12th grade, I was asked if I would then join the Air Force. And they said if I joined, I would have one stripe upon joining, which would be a step above everyone else that's joining. But I decided I didn't want to. And prior, when I was 14, 15, 16, the government here in the United States, you had to go into the military. You had to sign up. But they were doing a drawing every year, and they would take 365 dates of the year and draw the first one, whatever that date was. You were a number one eligible student to go into the military. And then 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 365. And as you got into the 300s, you probably would never even be brought into the military. So each year I would look at that in the newspaper saying my birthday was May 14th, so I would always look up May 14th and see what my number would have been if I was 18 years old. And then when I was, I believe, 16 or 17, they stopped the draft, and it was all voluntary after that, so I never did have to go, or I never wanted to go. So I skipped the military, and I headed to, in my high school days, 12th grade, our school said that if you have enough credits from the 3 years in high school that you could leave in the month of January. You didn't have to attend school anymore after December. So in January, I went to the West Coast, to Washington, and that's where I was trying to find work. It was very slow time then, and it rained every day almost, and cold, and in the 30s temperature, and it was different than Detroit as far as the weather goes, and I wasn't real excited. And then in March of that year, that's when Matt Traffy had called and asked if I'd come to New Hampshire and work for Hutter Construction. So I drove out here, and I started working for them, and I worked about a year for that company, Hutter, and they did masonry, so I was a laborer. Then that's when my brother Dave was already in the S&S concrete floor business. In '74, he was doing that. So he asked if I would want to work for him. And because it was slow with the masonry during the late winter, I decided I would go to work for them. So that's when I started with S&S Concrete. And I worked every day pouring floors all around New England here. And the first 6 months, I remember distinctly that it was tough work, and I didn't have any experience with placing and finishing concrete. So you're always puzzled, and you try and even just trowel an edge. You watch somebody next to you do it, and it looked like easy, and then you try, and it's all bumpy. And so anyhow, it took about 6 months before I started to feel more comfortable and part of the team. And then we just continued pouring for many years. We traveled a minimum of an hour every day, typically. There was probably about 8 employees. We worked at my brother Dave's house, and we were there for a number of years. I did a lot of little maintenance in his garage. He had the 2-car garage next to his house. So I remember distinctly in there changing blades, or we had some of those Wisconsin motors that didn't want to run very good sometimes, and dealing with the spark plugs and miscellaneous repairs. And it was definitely hard, and I just many times over probably the first 5, 6 years, I thought of maybe I should go do something else. But my brother Dave always treated me very, very good. And, the pay was good. And whenever I would look around to see if there's something else that I might be interested in, I always would realize that I don't know if I can, make more money going elsewhere. So I would just stick it out. And I was always appreciative of the way he would benefit myself and the other employees. At that one point, I just remember thinking I should maybe not work at S&S and maybe go out and do more mission work or travel, somewhere and share the word of God. And those were thoughts in my mind. And I don't know, one day it just came to me that the Lord just says, hey, do it today right here. You got ready-mix drivers backing trucks in here and you're working with other people. Just love on them and share the Lord. Today's a day, basically. So it kind of gave me a new feeling for what was going on. I was more comfortable. With a 2x4 aluminum 2x4s, and there'd be one man on each end striking off the concrete. And I know the first years that I was there, we often could pour pretty wet concrete. It was real loose and not hard to rake or screed. But as we were going, we would start working on projects that were demanding lower slump concrete. It was specified at, like a 4-inch slump. And so there were many, many projects that we were on that we'd have new inspectors or young inspectors. They weren't real qualified, I didn't feel, to even be an inspector, trying to enforce a 4-inch slump, which we didn't really mind that, but they often would only allow like a 2 to 3-inch slump, and they didn't want us to add water. And it's just way too stiff. So you would be discussing with them, telling them we need more water, and then they'd have to do another slump test, and that would take 5 minutes. And so because of the maybe 10 guys standing there, and every minute counts as far as getting the concrete down. And the sooner you have it all on the ground, the sooner you'll get home that night. Whereas if you're delaying and delaying during the day and you lose an hour or two, often then it cools down at night, so your last few loads you're finishing till midnight or whatever. So that was always a challenge with the inspectors. And as we were getting more and more of those projects, that slump became a real big issue in our daily placing and finishing. So we started talking about maybe going into like a power screed that you could set up pipes at the right floor elevation and then slide that screed. It's a gas engine vibrating screed that you could pull along the pipes. And that was a big advantage that we gained, when Dave bought a 40, 50-foot power screed. But it was still a lot of work to prepare, to get the pipes in all at the right elevation and move the screed around. You'd have 2, 3 guys, on each side moving that one end of it and trying to move it into position. And once it was down on the pipe and you're pouring, you could keep pulling it, but you had to always do a long, narrow strip. So it'd be 30, 40 feet wide by 100 or 200 feet long. And then you might even have to pick up the power screed, vibrating screed, and then carry it over to another section of the building because you had to do another narrow 30-foot wide strip. It wasn't, uniform like you can do with the laser screed. Well, I did that for a number of years, but then as we were growing and bringing in more employees, I pretty much started managing. But again, my brother Dave was he didn't jump in. He didn't just hand you the card and say, okay, now you're in management. You had to earn your way in there, just so he would know that it's going to get done right. So as we grew, I began to manage, the crews and schedule them in the mornings, and we even started like 2 different crews, and we'd have different leaders of crews, and so we were doing a lot of big, heavy commercial work. Well, what I recall is back around 1980, my brother, or 79 even, he started going to the World of Concrete. There was a new convention that someone had started, and I know the first couple years I didn't go. I was pouring while he was gone, but then he did invite me to go, and you could see all the new equipment that they had on the market, or maybe not even a new style, but just brand new machines, whether it's concrete pumps or leveling devices or vibrators or power trowels. It was all associated with concrete, clothing or whatever. But that would get your brain rolling, and we would talk periodically about coming up with some type of machine, a power machine that you could actually ride on to strike off the concrete. And we always had time, whether we're in the morning at work or if we're home in the evening just having dinner or coffee or just talking about it. And that happened for a number of years, from probably 81 or 80 to 85 at the World of Concrete. We were trying to get some of the big manufacturers, the bridge builders. They make the power screeds for paving the roads across the bridge, and trying to get those people to build us a machine that S&S could use. And we felt it would be very nice to have a power machine that you could ride on, but they all basically said no, that they can't build anything like that. It's not possible. And then there was the one year that I know my brother Dave had talked with one of the Gameco or one of the bridge paving machine companies, and they said that they would build him a machine, but it was like $100,000 they wanted for it. And that pretty much just shut us right up again, that we weren't going to be spending that kind of money for a ride-on machine. And then it was in late 84, my uncle Wally Niemela, we discussed with him many times about growth and business and whatever. And he said he has an engineer in northern Michigan, Phil Quincy, that we really should meet with him and discuss what we're thinking about for a power, screed. And we ended up going to the World of Concrete in 1985 in February, and he flew out there and met us there. So we spent 3 days walking the whole show. It's like 1 million square foot at that time. I know it's bigger now. But we would walk the show with him and look at different types of screeds that were on the market, and then explain what we were thinking that the machine should look like. And I specifically remember at the end of our meetings there, we went to a restaurant and we were eating dinner with him in Vegas, and we shared how we would like this screed to be able to have a telescopic boom that would reach out like 20 feet, that we needed at least 20 feet to reach out over the freshly placed concrete, and then we'd want to lower it down and pull it back toward the machine and strike it off. And then we also wanted, it to have a vibrator, and so it would consolidate the concrete. And then we also said that we want it to fit in the back of a pickup, that's how we'd want to move it around. And he was, taking notes throughout our meetings, and very cooperative, responsive, and very interested. So when we left that show in February, he said he was going to go back to his home office in Michigan, and he'll design something for us and let us know. And I believe it was somewhere in May or June that he had the drawings done, but he did tell us it will not fit in the back of a pickup truck. That, you have the weight issues when you extend that boom out, that you need the counterweight in the back of the machine, and you have to pull it on a trailer. So we said, okay, that'll work. And then he designed our first laser screed, and during that summer, the Niemela family actually, built the machine that he designed in northern Michigan. And our Uncle Wally was actively involved with his boys, gearing them up to make the machine, and he was like partnering with us as one of our partners. So in September of '85, they were pretty much done with the machine, and I went up into Michigan and actually, used it on like sand piles just to strike it off and see how it worked, and it seemed pretty interesting, like it would be something that'll work nice. So we had it shipped out here to New Hampshire, and we had a plan to it was a small basketball court in Brother Dave's yard, maybe 40 by 60 or 80 feet long. And I remember we were going to pour that as a sample when the machine came. And I did tell Dave the day before, we had it all formed up and it was ready to place concrete. And I said, why don't we just do one strip across? So it'll be like 20 by 40 foot, and just to test the machine. And it was a very good reason. A good idea, because when we did use the machine for the first time to strike it off, the surface of the concrete as it would slide forward looked like a washboard. It would go up maybe an inch and down and up, all in, like, it would go up an inch in about 3 inches and then back down. It was just constantly moving up and down, like it looked like a washboard, which is not acceptable at all. So, we cleaned up the machine and talked to Phil Quincy, and he did some work on the controls with the hydraulic controls. He said it wasn't fine-tuned enough. Those triggers that would tell the machine to go up or down as the laser beam would strike across it. So anyhow, that was our first. We ended up doing it in like 3 or 4 days, that court, but it was allowed us to keep improving the machine's design. But Dave and I were very excited, and we continued to bring it out to job sites then. And it was just interesting to me because some of our key employees there in the field didn't like the machine, and they weren't interested in having it on the job, and they were actually like, they would let us know they'd rather not use the screed today, and we said, no, we have to use it today. And it was puzzling to me because this was an exciting moment in our life, and why you would not want it there I couldn't quite figure out. But when I'd go on the jobs, it would get stuck in some of the, just even moving from the outside of the building just to get it inside. Often there'd be a real sandy driveway going in, and the machine was only 2-wheel drive, so it would be getting stuck in the middle of the driveway until it got into the building where it was a little more firm base. But even then, you'd have projects inside the building that had a soft base, and as the screed operator was trying to move to go to the next position, it would start spinning, and it wouldn't, you'd have to get something to pull the laser screed forward or move the boom out to shift the weight, and then you could move forward again. And we also had a rigid boom that was not a telescopic boom on our first prototype. So this rigid boom would actually, it was 28 feet long, and it would move forward 20 feet and then move back. But when it came back 20 feet, the back end of that boom would actually go behind the machine, so it stuck out like another 8-10 feet behind the machine. And you always had to deal with the columns, and when you went to turn the machine, rotate it, 30-40 degrees, you had to watch so the back end of the boom wasn't going to hit men or columns or, even maybe some drainage lines or whatever, pipes coming up out of the ground. So that was one of the real crucial negatives of our machine that we had first built. And we talked to Phil Quincy about it, and he started on a whole new machine that was going to have a telescopic boom. And we were using Sun diesel engines. I believe that's what they were. They were kind of an off-brand diesel, and we switched to a Deutz. And then we went to four-wheel drive and the telescopic boom. Those were some of the big changes that we made, and it was a huge difference in the quality of, time use of each pour. And that was probably in '86, I believe we had that one completed, the end of '86. Yeah, I know a lot of the people were average, concrete, placing and finishing companies, and their house might have been worth, $100,000, and then I'm trying to sell a machine for $165,000 or whatever. It was just way beyond their thought process, and that was a quick negative in their mind. But it's a kind of a long story. But you always have in business, you always have those contractors or owners that are aggressive, and they're really willing to take big challenges, and those are the ones that, the pioneers, and they go out and they would say, yeah, we will buy a machine, whereas that might be 1 out of 10 people. The other ones look at it and say, no. They didn't even know a year from now if we would even be in business. Our business was not known anywhere in the world. Whereas if it would have been John Deere or Caterpillar or somebody else doing this, they probably would have had confidence that they'd be there next year. So even that aspect alone was a reason why I believe some weren't interested in the machine. But it was puzzling to us as sellers how we would even demo the machine and they still wouldn't buy it, in the United States. And it was just interesting because the laser equipment we used was Spectra Physics. They made the lasers, and we used their transmitters and receivers to operate on our machine. And they had a dealer in England who would buy from them here in the States and sell in Europe. And they seen one of their brochures showed our laser screed in the brochure. And they found out that we actually were making those in the United States. And they had a customer in Wales that was interested in a power machine like that to place concrete. So they asked if we could get one into Europe. And my brother Dave said, yeah, absolutely. So we shipped it into Wales, and we went there and operated the machine on one of his buildings, and he ended up buying our first machine, was sold into Wales, England. Prior to that, we were trying to sell them here. I mean, with Phil Quincy and that, we were saying, if we can get this thing done, we could even start manufacturing them, for sale. Mm-hmm. And even that was a little bit hard here in New England because of our competition around New England. We didn't really want them to buy a screed, so we weren't trying to sell them right here locally because we wanted to have an advantage on projects that we were bidding on against them. And many of the builders then in this area that were demanding lower slump concrete, the owners and architects, engineers appreciated the ability of our machine. And I know when my brother Jim and my cousin Dave Somero came on, they were allowed, Jim, I think it was Jim, I'm not positive, but he got it whether it was specified. Yeah, Jim worked with ACI, I believe it was. And they ended up speccing it on different projects. Architects or engineers would actually put it on a contracting job that you have to use a laser screed. So then we would actually charge more money, like another 10 cents a square foot, or whatever the number was at that time, just to bring in the laser screed, which we might be pouring 25,000 feet now instead of 10,000 with the same amount of guys, 8, 10 guys. And we're getting more money because we have the laser screed, but we have way less hours into the project. So we were making money on that side too. So it was a big win right from the beginning. And then I do remember, again, Phil Quincy, the architect, designer, engineer, he was very, very faithful, and he would always, any changes that needed to be done or corrections of areas of the machine that weren't working well. I remember being out in Ohio with one of our first machines, and we'd be screeding during the day, and it was all aluminum built, the whole screed head, and there'd be pieces of it that were cracking and breaking, and if we didn't get them fixed, we wouldn't be able to pour the next day. So, yeah, but then Phil was always very cooperative in helping us, achieve accomplishments on improvements. This was in '86 that we built that second machine that went to Wales. And then because we had more interest, we started building more, and we started selling more. So 87, 88, 89, we started manufacturing, as many as we could, which might be, one a month or one every 2 months or whatever would come out. But at one point in the late 80s, we had probably, I think, 5 or 6 machines that were built, and they weren't sold. And then the economy died. So there was very little work going on right in 1990, the end of 89. So we had these machines sitting there, and I do remember I was making good money in the late 80s. My brother Dave would, we would share profits and whatever, and there was 8 months that we didn't take a check out of Somero Enterprise, but I still was placing and finishing with S&S, so I was getting paid, from him on a weekly basis that way. But after a couple of years of getting another extra check out of Somero Enterprise, it was a little down. You don't know if it's ending or what's happening. But it did pick back up again and continued to grow. And there was a point where even my brother Dave probably did more of that, especially internationally, but I was busy working with S&S, so I wasn't traveling a lot, with Somero. As it was growing, we had more managers that were running the project, and we hired Raudiola. He came and helped us, do the managing side, and I was able to, at that point, I think it was 91 or so, 92, I'm not sure, that I actually left S&S and went full-time with Somero Enterprise. We were doing it out of a small building. My uncle Wally Niemela found us a place in South Range, Michigan, and we bought a small building, and he was organizing that up in northern Michigan. But it was very small, so there wasn't a lot of room to be building 2, 3 machines at a time. So it was very difficult, but we had excellent employees right from the start, and they simply had the ability to get it done. I believe we had, how we would want it to be. Because we're in the concrete floor business, we knew what needed to be done on the, to keep the concrete properly placed and finished and in a timely manner. It's a live product. It's setting up on you, and that's controlling the whole situation, is how fast it's setting up. And so we always had that great respect for our customers, because we knew they were also in that same situation, that it was critical that the machine would work. And it wasn't like, oh, you broke something, well, we'll get you one next week. We had to get it to them right away to continue their daily operation. So it was always a challenge, but again, it takes good people to make it happen, and we were blessed by being able to hire many, many good people. Yeah, we had, my brother Jim and D3 then came on board back in the early 90s. I think it was 93. And that was a big help for us to continue growing. And they all had their own portions of the business that they ran and did an excellent job. Basically, our big pours early on by hand were, 5,000, 10,000 square feet, and we may even do a 15,000 or whatever, but that would be 20 guys or 15 guys or whatever. So it was always a lot of work. And then with the laser screed, we were able to continue doing those types of square footages in a day, but we would not need all the employees there to do it. So we actually would go on, some of them would go to another job and prep it for the next day while we're pouring, one job. But as we were growing, we had a customer down in Alabama who became a friend of mine, Ben Beavers. And he called me once. He was busy pouring concrete in Alabama. He had a big operation going, and he asked me if I would come down with some of S&S's guys, and he wanted to do 100,000 square feet in one day. So I said, sure, we'll come down. So we loaded up some guys and went down there, and we placed and finished 100,000 square feet, and that was like the biggest pour I had ever been involved with. So I was pretty excited about it and thought it was pretty rewarding. And then we came back and continued doing concrete here. And then he called me about a year later, and he said he had a 250,000 square foot project that he wanted to do in one day. And I just would shake my head and say, okay, we'll come down. So we went down and we poured a 250,000 square feet. It took like probably close to 24 hours to get it placed and then finished. But it was like maybe 30 hours by the time it was done, from one end to the other. So we went home pretty excited about making the biggest pour in the world, as far as we knew, 250,000 feet. And it wasn't too long later, maybe another year or so, that one of our customers was in St. Louis, and he did a 500,000 square foot. So he doubled us in one pour. But he did 500,000 square feet in one day. And I thought that was amazing, because that was the end of our being the top chief in placing concrete. We took second place. And then what was interesting is yesterday in our meeting, my brother Jim showed a brochure, and it said 552,000 square feet. So I'm pretty sure that might have been the same project, but it was in a different town. So I don't know if someone else then did a bigger one, but that's still a lot. They probably had 2 or 3 laser screeds going too. It wasn't just one machine.
Yeah.
But
wow, only possible because of
the laser screed.
What a couple of Michigan boys came up with on a napkin.
Yeah. Brother Dave's the one who did the napkin. Your grandpa. Well, I just remember my brother Dave being a little bit frustrated at growth and different things. I mean, it was a lot of work, and he talked about maybe we should sell it. And we talked about it, and we actually had a few people we discussed with, but it wasn't big money that they were giving. We thought it was pretty big, but we were still a very young company. I think the one was like 500,000 a guy was going to give us, and we were kind of interested in it, but it never worked out. He never could come up with any money, and so that was again a God's way of blessing us, because we would have probably not been happy after, but it definitely continued to grow.